Hello everyone, welcome to Starscream's Ghost, a Transformers podcast, your episode-by-episode podcast guide through the classic Transformers Generation 1 cartoon and now the Japanese anime continuity of Transformers Headmasters. I am Jeremy Graves, and joining me today, once again, as we continue our journey, I don't know why I say once again, because quite frankly, Andy, you are doing this entire thing with me, so I should change that wording now. Joining me, of course, is my good friend in crime, Mr. Andy Hanley. Good sir, how are you doing today?
Yeah, I would like to vanish on an iceberg. I gotta say, we're recording this on a hot day, and I think Galvatron may have the right idea. I think he knows what he's doing. Maybe this is the long game. He's just real hot. He just wants an iceberg.
You're not wrong there. So, folks, just going to get this sort of a few bits of housekeeping out of the way. But first of all, important kind of programming note, because today we are specifically covering episode 25 of Transformers Headmasters. We were originally going to be doing 2 episodes today, but recording schedules and stuff have sort of gone a little bit out of the window. So what we're doing is this specific podcast you're listening to now, we're going to be talking about episode 25, and then the next podcast you hear, it will be talking specifically about episode 26. That'll be available in a few weeks' time from the date of publishing. And then all going well, Andy, we should be back to our usual schedule of 2 episodes every fortnight in one podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, ironically, as it turns out, as well as being like life reasons and it's really hot reasons, also these 2 episodes make sense to talk about individually because stuff happens, stuff that is important happens. So you know, it makes sense to give it a little bit of love and attention.
Indeed, but I mentioned some housekeeping, a few other bits and bobs in case you are a first-time listener. First of all, thank you very much for checking out the show. We hope you enjoy it. Be you listening in audio-only form on your podcast provider of choice, or if you're joining us on the video version on YouTube, hey YouTube, how you doing? And you can find our YouTube channel at youtube.com/@Starscream's Ghost Podcast. You can watch every single podcast we record if you want to see us trying to cope with the heat today as we talk about many things that ultimately involve an iceberg. Just calling it like it is. When it comes to how you can reach us, you can find us on Twitter and Instagram under the name @StarscreamsPod. And in terms of the episodes of how we're watching Transformers Headmasters, if you're watching the YouTube version, you can see a little DVD set there right behind me. We are watching the UK DVD set from circa 2005 of Transformers Headmasters. That is the subtitle translation, basically, we are following because of that. There are other versions, as we've talked about in TF Wiki Notes, which we'll get onto once we've finished discussing the episode. But you can also find the episodes of Headmasters on YouTube. So if you want to join in the fun that way, you can do just that. So good sir, this episode 25, as you've already alluded to, there's a lot to discuss in this episode. But sort of general overview thoughts of what you thought of episode 25.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a weird one because it feels like it's not necessarily going to be, I mean, beyond the episode title, which, you know, once again kind of gives away quite a pertinent and important plot point. Like, it doesn't feel like it's going to be a big ticket episode to start with. And it's only really kind of when you get into it that it's like, oh, okay, so some things of pith and moment are going to happen in this episode. So yeah, it's kind of a slightly odd one because sometimes this series sets it out. It's still very clearly of like this is where all the big stuff is going to happen, and you know it really marks itself out as a tentpole. Whereas this one kind of it even with the episode title, it kind of blindsided me of like, oh, this is. I knew that this moment was coming. I was not expecting it to be right here, and even during this episode, it's like, no, surely this is not going to be the episode where that happens, but it is, as it turns out.
Yeah, and it's also kind of given away from the title card as usual as to who they're alluding to. But overall, though, this episode, there is a lot going on, but it does, as we sort of talked about in our last podcast, when it came to the feeling of how the show is almost aging up a little bit, this is another example of that, because there are some pretty devious things that are going on, both in this and the next episode, when we talk about that on the next podcast. So it is nice to see that direction of tone is continuing, and this kind of exemplifies that with what happens come the end of the episode.
Yeah. I mean, you know, the way in which it all comes about is you know, interesting. It's fair to say. But yeah, I mean, again, this episode, and you know, when we talk about the next episode 26 as well, like, yeah, it does. it goes in some surprisingly kind of grown-up directions for a kid's cartoon.
So we've sort of teased it enough, and we're kind of not giving away what is happening outright, because for once, it's not actually in the episode title, Andy, so we don't have to. But let's move straight on to episode 25. The Emperor of Destruction vanishes on an iceberg. Which is still a fantastic title.
It is. Finally, Galvatron insisting that everyone calls him the Emperor of Destruction is paid off.
We begin with the narrator saying the following. Meanwhile, at Autobot HQ. That's the opening line to the episode, folks. And I legit thought, wait, has my DVD gone wrong in some other way now? That was my first thought. But no, we have not missed something. Because we see that with it having touched down on Earth, we are now in the control room of Battleship Maximus. And the Headmasters are looking at a map of the planet Earth. Through dialogue, we see that the Autobots are growing bolder and more determined following the death of Ultra Magnus. You can listen to us discussing that in the previous podcast. It's also indicated that they haven't seen Scorponok or any other Decepticons for some time, but more specifically Scorponok. And they're all a little bit concerned that some of the attacks that they're seeing from certain Decepticons are at 5 separate locations across the Earth. And looking at a map and sort of where things are playing out, they're just wondering what the heck are the Decepticons planning, what is next. But throughout a lot of the series, and I think this is a very interesting point to note, Andy, the Autobots have had to be very reactionary as to how they go about things. Fortress has always been like, nope, we've got to wait and see what they do. We'll react accordingly and help whoever we need to. But that seemingly is about to change based on the following dialogue exchange. Fortress says, "We can't sit and wait for them to make a move. We need more information." Twincast then comes into frame and says, "Let me handle this for you. I'll find out what they're up to." Fortress responds with, "I'm relying on you." Then Twincast ejects all 4 of his cassettes and then gives a little rallying call of, "Listen up, keep your eyes and ears open for any information." And then they all head off to gather information accordingly. I really like this direction, Andy, because, like I said, Fortress has kind of been one not to sit back and do nothing, but not gone on the offensive, which is what Chrome Dome had been saying a lot, and that kind of now feels like the tables have turned following the death of Ultra Magnus, and maybe that has hit Fortress home far harder than we maybe initially realised.
Yeah, I mean, there are 2 kind of clear angles that this is kind of coming at here. Like, one of which is that, like, Ultra Magnus's demise is like a pivotal point of kind of changing the stakes a bit and kind of, making it clear that this is not the time to just kind of sit around and wait to see what happens. It's like, things are in pretty dire straits at this point, and they're going to have to be proactive about it. So yeah, there is that, and there is also like very definitely a sort of Chrome Dome story arc that is sort of cycling around here of being like, well, maybe, as impetuous as he was maybe being, like, perhaps he had a point here, and maybe, the direction of travel is now with him. So yeah, it is, again, it's the thing that the series has been pretty good at throughout, is of having that through line, and for all the episodic stuff it does, there's always that kind of, those underlying character arcs and story arcs that kind of tie everything together and actually progress throughout. So yeah, it's a good, it feels good and right that there is sort of a change in the direction of travel after Ultra Magnus dies, and it's not just a kind of like, okay, well, we're just going to carry on doing what we have been doing. So yeah, that was good. Although I do have a question. Has Twincast like broken the eject button on his cassette thing? Because it seemed like he had to like pull the thing down. Like it gave me some very 80s vibes of like, oh yeah, my cassette player's kind of broken, and now I need to pull the thing down to get the tapes out. And it's like, man, I feel your pain, Twincast. I really do.
I hadn't thought about that. That's a really funny note. And this point that we've just been emphasising about Fortress, this is emphasised even more when Metroplex is still also clearly smarting over Ultra Magnus's death, as we saw how much that hit him in the last episode. And Metroplex wants to participate in whatever counterattack is going to happen, simply saying, quote unquote, "I can't just stand by and watch." And then Chrome Dome responds to that by saying, "You're right. since Ultra Magnus's death, I want to do all I can to protect Earth. Which immediately made me think, what have your priorities been, Chrome Dome?
Yeah. Well, I mean, to be fair, like he's been space hopping a fair bit. Like, you know, Earth has not been like his native planet, so I can kind of understand. I was quite upset though that Metroplex transformed without making the Transformers noise. Like,
I didn't actually think about that until now.
Yeah. Like I feel like because you know, this series, as much as they've had like other like mechanical transformation sounds going on, they've always used the transforming sound. But in this episode, Metroplex transforms, he doesn't make that sound. I feel like that's the first time ever in Transformers that hasn't happened. I'm like, oh, I don't like this. This is not right.
I'll be interested to see if that comes up in the TF Wiki notes later.
Yeah.
Another thing as well, though, Chrome Dome saying he wants to do all he can to protect Earth. Anytime he makes a pledge like this about someone or somewhere, inevitably it goes bad.
Yes, I mean there is very much the like death flag thing of like, don't say that, because whenever you do, this usually ends badly.
But Fortress is not willing to risk Metroplex in battle at this stage, and as he argues with the with the big city bot, as the TF Wiki noted it, which I thought was a really cool phrase, reports start coming in of Autobot bases around the Earth being under attack, and numerous Autobot teams needing or having to put out distress calls for assistance. At this point, through some dialogue and such, we see that the Stunticons, Combaticons, the Terracons, and the Horrorcons have been dispatched by Fortress to assist accordingly. Another thing that comes across here is something that we've been talking about once again, Andy, when recapping these episodes, is that Earth has sort of just been forgotten about quite a bit in this show. And from Metroplex's dialogue, there seems to also be a little bit of feelings towards that notion as well. And it's almost like Metroplex didn't expect anyone else to want to help, or the fact that maybe the Earth just wasn't being treated as a priority. Because we got a little bit of a dialogue exchange here which directly addresses that. Metroplex saying, Fortress saying, like I said, everybody's come to help. And then Chrome Dome saying, we'll fight with all our strength, don't worry, as he says that to Metroplex. So it's interesting that they're now playing on that theme as well, and that's clearly, whether that was by design or whether that's just how it worked out, but that is something that we had noticed building up to this point in the series, so it is nice to see that they've acknowledged that as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of, you could argue in the grand scheme of things, it's kind of weird how everything is centering on Earth all of a sudden, because it's like all the Decepticon plans are like, oh yeah, something Earth. And it's like, you know, it is a very clear plot device of like, oh, we want to make, you know, the big climax of this series more relatable and make it all around Earth. But yeah, like it's a very definite sort of recentering, having been bouncing around all these other planets. And it kind of works quite well because, you know, we've seen other planets being blown up and stuff, so like the stakes are there, like you kind of know what's potentially going to happen here, and God knows, given this series, like you wouldn't be surprised if they just blew up the Earth at the end of it and be like, oops, we failed. But yeah, like it works pretty well in the end, and it does all kind of mesh together quite nicely narratively, at least.
So Metroplex ultimately acquiesces with having to wait to be involved, but with one sort of condition, in that when the time comes, and although he says Galvatron, I think maybe he meant Six Shot in the dialogue, there may have been a little bit of an error there, but he basically says when the time comes, they are mine to deal with. So one assumes that that Six Shot is on Metroplex's radar. Watch out.
Yeah, which is fair. Like, you know, he did kill his buddy, so, you know, revenge is a dish best served cold, etc., etc.
And that's kind of how the first section of this episode has wrapped up, as it were, and we're going to sort of move on to Char in a second, but in terms of following on from the death of Ultra Magnus, Andy, I like the way that they've managed to set up a lot in this opening scenario, and what it leads to as well. If you didn't perhaps figure out what the episode title meant, you may not have realised it, but what it's all leading to and what we're about to discuss, a lot of plot threads are being just thrown at you and seeds planted. It's really cool to see.
Yeah, that's the thing, because it's sort of, you know, this feels like it could just be another typical, like, we're going to found an energy source kind of gambit, but then like it sort of starts to up the ante of just like, no, this is actually going to be something a bit bigger than this is going on. And we finally start to kind of see the lid lifted on a lot of the mysteries that were still outstanding in this series over the course of this episode.
Meanwhile, on Char, we see that Galvatron, Cyclonus, and Scourge are watching footage of Wingwolf, that being Sixshot's hidden transformation that we were introduced to in a recent episode, attacking Earth with the two lieutenants of Galvatron kind of grumbling to each other about how Sixshot is just showing them up quite a bit. Some of the dialogue exchange being Scourge saying, "Such overblown praise for such a tribal deed." Cyclonus then responding with, "I agree. We should get out there and join the fight." Galvatron then pipes up and says, "What are you whispering about? You two could learn a lot from Sixshot." Cyclonus then going, "Yes, we have great respect for Sixshot." And then Scourge responding with, "We would very much like Sixshot to show us the secrets of his martial success." And then Galvatron just responding with, "He's way out of your league."
It is kind of weird. Like I feel like even over the course of this series, like Scourge and Cyclonus in particular have just like been reduced in importance to the point where they're just a couple of like gossiping school kids now who are just like, whispering behind teachers' back about who they like and don't like. And it's like, man, I don't know, like Cyclonus felt like he was pretty much running things at various points in this show, and now he's just kind of like, and to be fair, like Sixshot has kind of taken their jobs in a lot of ways. Like it feels like this is all the stuff that these guys would be doing, and now it's like, well, now they've got that ninja guy, I guess. Like we're kind of, we're just left, doing the cleaning back at Galvatron's base.
Yeah, they could just pick up some of the pieces after the fact.
Exactly.
But it's a far cry from a Scourge point of view of when he like had the Matrix for an episode and went all like roided up and such. I think that was season 2, if I remember.
Yeah, I can't remember if that was 2 or 3, but yeah, like definitely Scourge and Cyclonus both operating in reduced circumstances at this point.
Actually, no, it must have been season 3 because the Matrix wasn't introduced until the movie, was it?
No, yes, that is very true.
There we go. Elsewhere in the base on Char, in a follow-up to all the planet hopping and energon gathering from the last arc that we saw, we see Counterpunch, the Autobot sort of double agent, if you will, looking at just the colossal pile, Andy, of energon cubes. I know that we were aware they collected a lot, but holy heck, that's a lot of energon.
Yeah, it's like, good job Megatron isn't around, because probably drink through that in a couple of days.
As Counterpunch is leaving the cargo bay, though, we suddenly hear someone go, "What have you been doing in there?" And it's Galvatron. Counterpunch responding with, "Oh, Lord Galvatron, I didn't know you were there." "Anything for me?" says Galvatron, implying any information. "I've been watching the movements of the Autobot Headmasters closely. What are they planning?" Sixshot has been attacking continually, but there's been no reaction from Fortress. "What are you trying to say?" says Galvatron. "Well, they might attack us if they knew how unmanned our defenses were," says Counterpunch. "That's what you think, eh?" "Yes, sir." "We've no traitors here. Don't waste my time with such rubbish." "Yes, sir. What are your plans?" "With this next battle, I'm about to make history. Soon I will be leaving for the Earth." And a little gleam appears in Galvatron's eye when he says that. In Counterpunch's eye, sorry, when he says that. And then Counterpunch then follows up by saying, "Make history with your next battle, you say?" Kind of wanting a bit more information, egging him on slightly. And then Galvatron clearly can tell and just goes, "You'll understand soon enough." So, it's interesting to see this little seed being planted as well, Andy, because Counterpunch has done a good job of just kind of being there and not front and center in a situation, but that goes in a complete 180 in this episode, and it's a really fun moment to see.
Yeah, it's I've been wanting a bit more of this, because it's like you've got this kind of like double agent on the inside. Like it feels like he should be getting more more airtime than he is. And yeah, this is the episode where we very much get that, like with varying degrees of competence from Punch/Counterpunch, it should be said. Like there are times where like I really have no idea what you're doing, and how you've managed to last this long without anybody calling you out. But yeah, this is quite a good kind of conversation of just him trying to eke a bit more out of Galvatron about his plans, which we will find out about soon enough. And yeah, just kind of getting some vague morsels at least to go back with.
Though Counterpunch appreciates he didn't get a lot of info, he just rushes outside to go and report to Fortress. But as he's trying to do this, Andy, he kind of runs past Scourge and Cyclonus, who basically just have a laugh with each other that maybe Counterpunch got scolded by Galvatron and that's why he's rushing. They really are just being reduced to like the comic foils at this point, aren't they?
Yeah. I mean, they're basically like the Statler and Waldorf of this series at this point. And they're just like point and make stupid jokes about everyone.
We didn't get... I mean, Galvatron mentions, I should say, that he was going to be leaving for Earth imminently. He wasn't joking, Andy, because the next shot we see, he's hovering in Earth's orbit. And the narrator then just says, Galvatron's ambitious scheme is to take control of the Earth, but can he possibly succeed? Of which we still don't actually know what his plan to take over the Earth is. Even from the last episodes that we were watching, when it was implied he wanted to do something, we still don't actually know what he wants to do.
Yeah. I mean, there's this episode and the next, we kind of finally really get to see what everybody's actual plan is for the Earth and a bit more generally. But yeah, like at this point, this is still like the big outstanding mystery. Like maybe he just wants to go and make friends with everybody. Who can say?
We're now back on Earth, and Counterpunch, who is now transformed into his Punch persona, if you will, heads for Autobot City to inform Fortress and the Headmasters of what he has learned. But they ultimately mistakenly believe that Galvatron plans to have Scorponok, who, as mentioned earlier, has just been absent from recent sightings, as it were, to have Scorponok lead the attack against planet Earth. At the same time, Scorponok is then discovered by Twincast and Steeljaw in the ruins of what, according to the TF Wiki, is an Autobot energy plant in Alaska, which has also been demolished. The pair, though, then come under attack from a passing six-shot who blasts Twincast into a ravine, Andy! We've not seen a ravine on Earth in ages, so if you had that on your long-term bingo card, folks, from the early days of the podcast, you can check that box off. And Steeljaw escapes to report back to Fortress, having to leave his comrade. Which, in fairness, Andy, we'll get onto this in a minute. But, in fact, no, I'm going to tell you this now, because this is a fun little moment for Steeljaw. As this attack is going on, Steeljaw calls out to Twincast, saying, "Are you okay, brother?" And even in the Japanese dialogue, he says Aniki, which is the Japanese word for brother. So it kind of implies they're very much treating the cassettes like a family together, which I think is a really cool dynamic that I hadn't actually thought of before.
Yeah, no, I did also pick up on that and quite liked it. And it's feels slightly less weird than them like calling Twincast dad, because does sort of like give birth to them on a regular basis. But no, it's kind of. It sort of makes sense, because we've had a little bit of this before, like, around the death of Blaster, like, where, the cassettes were allowed to be sad for, like, 30 seconds before they were told to just get on with it and go to the next mission. Which was still, like, perhaps the cruelest thing that I've seen the Autobots do in this entire show. But yeah, it has established that there's a very close bond there, so it sort of makes sense that it's somewhat familial.
Then we hear the narrator say, back on the Autobot HQ and on Athenia, Spike is getting more and more angry. Just, the narrator's got some cracking one-liners there. So as you can tell, we're now back on Athenia. We have Wheelie, Daniel, and Spike watching footage of the Decepticons attacking Earth, with Spike, as the narrator implies, growing more and more enraged at the fact that the villains are just destroying Earth and all the natural habitat and such. He is about to contact Fortress to find out why the Autobots are not doing anything about this. But then RC steps into the conversation and points out that the Autobots and Decepticons can fight each other at any time, but that victory can only be won by finding out what Galvatron's true plan is. Now, that element of what RC has said is kind of already being taken care of by Punch to a degree in trying to get the intel for what the plan is and such. But it is interesting, Andy, that RC, despite what we were saying about perhaps the Autobots being a bit more on the front foot now, RC has kind of now pulled that notion back a bit, because they want to be on the front foot, but need to do their regular plan to be on the front foot. It's kind of a weird dynamic.
Yeah. I mean, this is sort of, and this is kind of the difficult situation that the Autobots find themselves in, because I mean, it's sort of the classic Transformers gambit: is you always know what the Decepticons are up to, and I think it is one of the interesting and refreshing things about this series is that that's not really the case. Like, as the viewer, you don't get to see the full picture at this point, and like neither do the Autobots. So it's not the usual like, oh, okay, well, they're trying to get this energy source or whatever, and that does make it difficult for them to actually be proactive, because what are they being proactive against beyond the generic kind of Decepticon attack problem? So it's kind of, there's an interesting sort of angle and a bit of nuance to it that you don't normally get from Transformers.
Now, I mentioned that Punch is trying to get the intel. How is he doing this? Once again, back in his Counterpunch persona, he has found a Decepticon base on Earth, where he is now trying to gather the information that he needs. And there's a fun little moment here, Andy, where Punch kind of implies he maybe sort of forgets which persona he is from time to time, because he sort of transforms back into his Counterpunch persona and then says, I'm in my Decepticon colours, so no need to hide now. Sometimes I get confused. Which makes you wonder, is this going to be a plot point where he's going to just suddenly come back to Autobot base as Counterpunch, they're going to attack him, and then, or something like that?
It does feel like it, because that kind of almost happens twice in and around this scene, because there's a little bit later on where he kind of decides to transform, and there's like, wait, no, this isn't going to work, and then transforms back again. And it does feel like, that feels, if it was just a one-off, I could appreciate it maybe being a throwaway thing, but the fact it kind of makes that point twice of like, sometimes maybe you choose the wrong transformation for the wrong moment, that I do wonder whether either he's gonna screw up in front of not Galvatron now, in front of the Decepticons, and kind of get caught out that way, or whether, like you say, he's gonna rock up to Metroplex in the wrong transformation, and that's gonna go bad. But it definitely feels like there's a bit of foreshadowing going on here, so I would not be surprised if that happens at some point.
Then we get another very weird scene involving Counterpunch, because Scourge opens a door and hits Counterpunch in the face. And Counterpunch starts just like crawling away, claiming to be looking for something that he dropped on the ground, and then can't decide for a moment if it's better if he remained in his Counterpunch or Punch colours. And this was that moment you were referring to. It's a really, really weird moment. But like you say, and like we've both kind of figured out, this is clearly going to lead to something, or it's the biggest red herring we've had in the series so far.
Yeah, because it just feels like otherwise it's like a needless addition to that scene, because obviously, it's trying to have its fun, goofy comedy moment of, Counterpunch trying to make an excuse for why he's just hanging around like that, and is really not very good at it for the covert agent. Should maybe work on his lying game there. But like the whole part after that feels completely superfluous unless it has a broader intent within the series at some point.
Then he resorts to the most basic of espionage tactics to get what he needs, Andy. How could he get the information? He listens to a conversation.
Yeah. I mean, again, never have a conversation about your entire plans for the future, like next to a grill that is in the adjoining room, because never gonna end well.
And it's this scene, everyone, that proves to be pivotal for the direction, most likely, of the remainder of the series. I'm going to do my best to do this conversation justice, because what is about to be said, Andy, is actually kind of mental. in some ways.
It really is. I've got to admit, when this was revealed, I just laughed out loud, which is probably not Galvatron's intent. But yeah, this sure is a plan.
So Sixshot says, I think Scorponok's making the necessary preparations for blowing up the Earth. Galvatron responds with, so he's trying to betray me then? Before you deal with him, I would like your opinion, Lord Galvatron. I have something to show you first. Then on screen, we the viewer can see that they are looking, Andy, at what I'm going to attempt to eloquently say as a fat version of Galvatron wanting to be Unicron.
Yes, that is exactly it. I mean, the only note I wrote was just fat Galvatron. But yes, he is basically has designs on being some kind of Unicron, which is a plan. I'll give him that.
There is also some on-screen text which actually isn't subtitled, but I did a little bit of digging, Andy. This was me holding up my phone with the Google Translate app open and trying to look at what the text said, and it literally just translates as Grand Galvatron.
AKA Fat Galvatron.
And then Galvatron goes on to say, with the Earth incorporated into my body, I will become the ruler of the universe. But in order for my plan to succeed, I require many transformation components. The weakest point is my head. Therefore, I require the finest body parts from the most superior warriors. Sixshot then says, you mean... And Galvatron cuts him off and says, you, Sixshot, are one of our finest warriors. After myself, of course. You represent the elite of the Decepticon warriors. Nobody can rival your loyalty and bravery. Understand? Of course, there are many who would sacrifice themselves for me, but you are my first choice. And there is just a wonderful long glare from Sixshot that they focus in on at this point. Just this plan, Andy, is utterly mental from a Transformers standpoint, and we have seen some plans in all of G1 so far.
Yeah, I mean, I have so many questions. I mean, just beyond the bare basics of this plan of just like why, but also like why Earth? Like, why do you want Earth to be your body specifically? Also, I mean, yes, you're going to need a lot of like transformation components to make this work, but also like surely just generally size is an issue here. Like, I don't see how just getting some bits of Sixshot is going to help with this plan. Like, how many parts are we talking exactly? I kind of want some specific numbers here because it seems like it would be quite a lot because Earth is not a small planet in the grand scheme of things. Yeah, it's bonkers. I mean, I would love to know who decided. It almost feels like, because clearly they decided, okay, well, like, you know, Zarek's plan is going to be to blow up the Earth. That one's easy. Like, but we need Galvatron needs to have a different plan. Like, what should it be? The fact that this is what they came up with is absolutely wild to me. But fair play, I guess, for coming up with something innovative and unexpected.
Now, Counterpunch is listening to this entire conversation by, like, peeking through, like, a grate in the next room over. And he sort of steps away and then says to himself, which in itself is a double meaning, his plan is terrible.
Yes. I mean, correct in both senses.
And then adds, I must report this immediately. Counterpunch is making a beeline outside at this point, but Galvatron then exits the room that he was in and notices Counterpunch running round the corner. And there is just that momentary glare from Galvatron of, I know what you did. Which also plays into what we were saying earlier, Andy, and also Galvatron even saying from a dialogue point of view, we have no traitors here. Kind of almost implying Galvatron knows.
Yes, yeah. It's always hard to tell with Galvatron whether he's just being an idiot or incredibly astute. So it's, you know, it's the jury's still out, but it does seem like the weight of evidence is pointing in that direction at this stage.
Obviously, Punch is now heading to Autobot City to report all he has learned, arriving just as Metroplex convinces Fortress to allow him to join the impending attack on Scorponok Scorponok, in Alaska. Metroplex's words specifically being, "I must avenge the death of our city commander with my own hands." And Fortress responding with, "I understand. Fight with all your might." And then both Metroplex and Battleship Maximus take off to head to battle. We then cut to an Autobot science base in Alaska. Scorponok, now in his smaller Zarak form for point of reference, and the Decepticon Headmasters are planting another series of planet-destroying explosives, like, the ones that blew up Cybertron, the ones that blew up Mars earlier in the series, those ones. But all of a sudden, Six-Shot arrives. Scorponok is expecting a conflict, but Six-Shot says, "I'm not trying to catch you out. You'll be in trouble if you continue with this." Scorponok responds with, "What are you trying to say?" "It's something important, whether you believe me." And then we get some tense words between the two sides, but just as the Decepticon Headmasters are about to attack, Scorponok says, "Hold it. Let's hear what he has to say before you do anything." And now, in an attempt to sort of condense what plays out here, Andy, a little bit, because there's a lot of sort of stuff that's said, we come to ultimately find out that Scorponok and the Decepticon Headmasters now kind of consider Six-Shot an ally, because we discover he is not willing to allow Galvatron to willingly sacrifice himself, I should say, for spare parts. At this point, Galvatron soon arrives, and Six-Shot and Scorponok engage in a little bit of pantomime, let's say, Andy, because Six-Shot basically just grabs the Zarak form of Scorponok by the waist and holds him up like he's holding a baby in the air. And just holds him there for about a minute. It's really random.
Yeah.
And this leads to the following dialogue exchange. Galvatron saying, "Long time no see, Scorponok. I'll take that transector now." Scorponok responding with, "That's my life's work. I refuse to hand it over." "That's why I want it," says Galvatron. "Not everything in life goes according to plan." Galvatron then says, "What? Are you defying me, Scorponok?" Which my initial thought, Andy, was, mate, he's done this so often.
Yeah.
At this point, Battleship Maximus and Metroplex arrive. Fortress making it clear that he knows Galvatron's plan and vows that neither Scorponok or Galvatron's plan will succeed. You know what this means, Andy? It's gotta sell a bunch of toys battle time! Because we have three scenarios at play here. We've got Six-Shot v Metroplex, Galvatron versus all four Autobot Headmasters, and Scorponok, now in the Transector in Scorpion mode, versus Battleship Maximus. A quick sidebar as well, that there's a little moment to acknowledge that Steeljaw is making sure that Twincast is okay, because they're now in that same ravine that he fell into earlier. He's a bit groggy, having been knocked out, which I didn't know being able to knock out a Transformer was a thing, Andy, but sure. And either way, he's awake now, so Twincast is not dead.
Yes, yeah. I mean, it's the constant kind of like thing with Transformers. You can never quite tell like what is going to offer Transformer and what isn't. It's like you'd have thought falling into a deep ravine would have been quite problematic. I feel like it has been for other individuals in the past, but yeah, turns out Twincast is A-okay.
As Metroplex and Six-Shot are engaging in an aerial battle, Scorponok just starts attacking Fortress Maximus, like with claws and stuff, and the four Headmasters are surrounding Galvatron, so we've got all these three battles still going on, like I mentioned. The fight takes them to a different chasm, Andy, which randomly, we now look like we're in Antarctica. I say randomly because don't forget, folks, we're in Alaska. That was noted earlier, so it does make sense, even though 1 minute you're in like a rocky ravine, the next minute we're basically at what looks like Antarctica.
Yeah, that's global warming for you, I guess.
Fair point. So, the fight is now in the icy waters, and Galvatron is mullering the four Autobot Headmasters. They have got no chance against him. This really emphasizes the power difference between Galvatron and those four Autobot Headmasters. But then, as it looks like all is lost, Punch arrives and simply just shouts, "His weak spot's his head!" It's that one of those key lines, Andy, that is so pivotal to what happens next. Because the quartet of the Headmasters then enter Head Formation of Friendship. And they bombard Galvatron with blasts from their combined energy. But the formation is then broken when Galvatron just shoots Hardhead out of the sky. He retaliates by knocking Galvatron into the ocean, and then rejoins the Head Formation of Friendship, and then using their increase in power. But in this instance, it's a big increase in power, it's got to be said. The Headmasters then start collapsing several icebergs on top of Galvatron. And Galvatron's kind of got that look of, no, help me, I can't get out, as he's sort of trying to reach for anything and anyone. But then, more icebergs fall on top of him and we can't see him. And then we see one giant final sort of laser shot and a giant almighty explosion. And what that is, Andy, it turns out, is Galvatron's death. Galvatron has died.
Yeah, not. I mean, again, at least I'm surprised they didn't call this episode "The Emperor of Destruction Dies Under an Iceberg," because that feels like that's more like on point for how this show normally titles its episodes. But yeah, like I said, I knew this. I have seen this moment on Twitter numerous times because it is a particularly like dumb and goofy way for like one of the most powerful Decepticons of all time to die from a fucking circle of friends just beaming down on him somehow, and then just like getting buried under ice. But yeah, that's it. Galvatron is done, which it does feel sort of weirdly anticlimactic, given that we've had so much in play, and given some of the deaths that we've had from other characters throughout this series. It feels quite low-key, to be honest.
Yeah, and especially as well, given some of the seeds that they have been planting, like the Grand Galvatron plan, like the whole thing about, Punch and Counterpunch, and you could have had a little revenge element for Galvatron, and Six-Shot having turned on Galvatron now. There were so many things where I was thinking initially, oh wow, that, like I mentioned earlier, there are so many seeds being planted here for various storylines, and you've basically just culled about 3 or 4 of them in the space of like 10 seconds there.
Yeah, and I mean, the worst thing of all is we're not even going to get to see Fat Galvatron. Like, you dangled that tantalizing morsel in front of us, and now, now it's gone, dashed forever.
Admittedly, I didn't realise at first that he was dead, because it's not sort of clearly indicated. I just thought, oh, he's frozen under a polar ice cap, he'll be back in like 2 episodes. But then, as we start to go a little bit further into this, Six-Shot and Scorponok start retreating, and the Autobots are just sort of looking out into the icy sea. Fortress appears and sort of goes, that power increase was incredible. And Chrome Dome responds with, yeah, it surprised me too. I never realised we had that much power. And then, the reason I mention this a little bit confusing is because then the narrator concludes the episode by saying, Galvatron, the evil emperor, has disappeared beneath a sea of ice. But what about Scorponok and Six-Shot? What about their evil scheme to destroy Earth? Autobots, you must always remain vigilant. And again, based on that wording, I was thinking, okay, so he's clearly not dead. He's probably just, knocked out, as that's now been established as a thing under the sea. But no, it wasn't until I went on the TF Wiki just to do some cross-referencing of notes, and literally, the line that the TF Wiki says is, they're looking out over an icy sea, the final resting place of the Emperor of Destruction.
Yeah.
And it's just like, oh, he's actually dead. Okay.
Yeah, which is, it is also one of those things that's kind of doubly random because, across Transformers continuity, like, Jetfire was found frozen in ice and they just brought him back to life and he was okay. Like, I mean, as has been well established, like, Trypticon falls into bodies of water on, like, a weekly basis and he's, maybe out for the count for a little bit, but he always comes back. So I'm not sure quite what it is about this specific. Maybe it's just because it's super cold, like because it's Alaska. Maybe it's just, maybe it's just too much for Galvatron's body. But yeah, it doesn't really. at no point does it feel particularly final during those scenes. Like it kind of feels like it almost feels like the perfect, if this was like G1 Transformers, you'd have like very last shot of the episode, or maybe like a few episodes later, just like a hand coming through the ice, and it would just be like, haha, Galvatron's actually still alive. But no, this is it apparently. So yeah, he's a baked Alaska now.
Fair play there, Andy. Fair play. So I guess before we get onto the TF Wiki notes, and we'll see if it elaborates on anything, thoughts on this episode overall? I've got to say, from my perspective, I thought this episode was great fun, sans the kind of low-key ending of Galvatron, as it were. I thought there were so many great things at play, so many seeds planted, as I've mentioned. It was great to see some actual espionage-related stuff happening. A really, really cool episode. No pun intended with the ice thing as well, by the way. But, yeah, just really, really good stuff, and really looking forward to seeing what happens next.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of... Yeah, there are definitely a lot of points here that are kind of, things we wanted to see, I feel like, across the course of the series. Like the part of it that is sort of the weirdest to me is just, like, this feels like it should be, like, the penultimate episode, and the next episode always feels like it should be the last episode, but there's still a fair chunk of stuff yet to happen. So it's sort of... Honestly, I mean, it blindsided me because, like I say, I knew what becomes of Galvatron in this series. I just wasn't expecting it to be placed here within the context of the show as a whole. I always assumed that was like a final episode or, close to final episode thing.
Final arc, as it were.
Yeah, certainly. But no, yeah, and here we are. Like, I guess... The show is called The Headmasters, so of course they want to kind of engineer it so that the final showdown is literally between the Autobot and the Decepticon Headmasters, and Galvatron is a blockage in that chain. So it sort of makes sense to remove him in much the same way that Ultra Magnus died. But yeah, man, the body count of this series is quite something. Like, it's kind of getting up there with the film at this point.
So we now move on to the TF Wiki to see if there's any other sort of trivia notes or elaboration on details. I do want to point out, first of all, that one of the first things I did see is in their episode recap, they've got a screenshot of Galvatron in the ice, and their caption for it is "One Galvatron on the rocks."
Of course.
It's a fair play. Right, so, continuity notes. Galvatron's master plan was first hinted at in Fight to the Death on planet Beehive, and it was revealed that he planned to, here was the phrase he used, Andy, incorporate the Earth into his system. And that's what he said in the Ultra Magnus Dies episode. So, I guess, thinking about that line specifically, that makes a little bit more sense now knowing about Grand Galvatron, but even at the time, that was still a weird thing to say.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, because I remember we sort of talked about it at the time of just like, well, what the heck does that even mean? And little could we imagine what was actually in store.
They mention here, the idea itself was a decent one, especially given Galvatron's desire to control Unicron's power and subjugating him in Transformers the movie, which I'll add an additional note in saying, though technically isn't in this continuity, but that aside. But the visual execution of Grand Galvatron is ridiculously hilarious, says the TF Wiki.
It absolutely is.
Scorponok's desire for power was pretty obvious almost from the moment he appeared in the series, but his current plan for the destruction of the Earth was begun in the previous episode. That is correct, because he was sort of secretly plotting something with the Headmasters, sort of early on in the episode. I do remember that happening now that they mention it. The head formation of friendship continues to undergo new changes with each passing episode. This time, the Autobots debut the ability to shoot their charged up energy as destructive bolts. And a final note here. Okay, so this kind of... Okay, this is muddying the waters a bit, Andy, but I'm just going to read it verbatim. Galvatron will not be freed from his icy imprisonment until Return of Convoy, when Dark Nova releases him and upgrades him into Super Megatron. What is Return of Convoy, you ask? According to the TF Wiki, Fight Super Robot Lifeform Transformers Return of Convoy was the 5th Japanese exclusive Transformers sub-franchise released in 1991. It received even less media support than its predecessor, eschewing animation completely. Return of Convoy continued the storyline of the animated continuity where Zone left off, and the story was told through a single comic issue and a series of story pages. The Return of Convoy storyline went back to basics, revolving around the resurrection of Optimus Prime as Star Convoy by the Battlestars and their battle against Dark Nova, and the similarly revived Super Megatron. So there you go, Andy. That's what that was.
Yeah. So I guess it's not a permanent state of affairs, and I mean, I guess in a weird way that does sort of make sense, because at this point the only people that would maybe want to rescue Galvatron from his kind of icy depths would be Sixshot, who has lost all motivation to do that now that he knows what Galvatron's plans are, and Scorponok, who never had any motivations to help Galvatron with anything. So it's sort of, when you think about it and kind of like think it through, it does sort of make sense that it's like, well, yeah, like there is the possibility there that you could save him, but like who's actually going to on the Decepticon side? Like nobody. So yeah, I guess that kind of adds up when you actually think it all the way through.
Yeah, and I guess at this point as well, what's Sound Blaster's point of view of all this?
Yeah. I mean, you know, the days of holding hands with Galvatron are long gone by. So yeah, even he seemed to, and again, you'd assume he'd also be like on the chopping block for like parts for Fat Galvatron as well. So you know, I don't think anybody's going to be particularly into that, bringing him back at this juncture.
So continuity errors. When the Autobots are looking for Galvatron, they're flying over snowfields. Meanwhile, he's in a rocky desert area where they find him and start fighting. It remains rocky until Galvatron throws the 4 Headmasters, and then he gloats over the fact that no match for him, and suddenly they're in front of a glacier.
Yeah, it's a particularly glaring error. I feel like even as continuity errors go for this series, it's like, did you not? Somebody must have missed the memo that they were supposed to be in Alaska.
So, Galvatron can survive being at ground zero of an explosion powerful enough to blow up an entire planet, i.e. Cybertron, and yet he can't dig his way out from a few tons of ice. That's screwed up, man.
Yeah, well, you know, it's. I mean, it's like with humans, if you like fall into like frozen water, like the body shock is actually what does for you. Like, you know, it just massively reduces your capacity to do anything. So maybe you just went into shock. That's my diagnosis in a desperate attempt to make any of this make sense.
Here's an interesting trivia note. This episode is only one of a small number to include an original animated sequence before the title card appears. Thus far, every copy of this episode released in the West omits this sequence, which consists of Sixshot rallying the Decepticons.
Oh, okay. Which I guess also makes sense why you start with the meanwhile.
Yes, that makes sense, and there you go.
Because, yeah, so there is actually a reason for the meanwhile. It's because, yeah, there was a cold open, which, yeah, is incredibly rare for this kind of thing.
See, this is why we do the TF Wiki notes, Andy, because now that makes complete sense.
Yeah, and also makes sense why, like, none of the Western releases had it, because it probably either got omitted from all the tapes, or they never thought to check that there was anything before the credits, and so when you're cutting the episode, you're just like, okay, yep, I found the start of the opening, there we go. So a shame. I wonder if that's got to be like floating around online somewhere, surely.
It's got to be
for our like delectation. So yeah, we'll maybe have to look that up so that we can truly say that we have watched all of this episode.
This is a weird phrase. I'm just going to read this verbatim. This might mean more to you, Andy, than it does me. Galvatron 2's end in Marvel Generation 1 comics somehow bears a little resemblance to Galvatron's final fate in this episode.
No, that doesn't necessarily. I mean, there's a lot that I've kind of forgotten or don't know about, like the very end of like the G1 comic continuity. Yeah, there's a lot that happens at the towards the end of that. I think there's so much like time skipping and time hopping, and time travel. That's the phrase I'm looking for. So it's hard to tell like what's going on like in at that juncture. There is it would totally make sense to me that there is like a second Galvatron in that world. So sure, I can buy into that.
Would you like to know any other information about Galvatron 2?
I mean, let's dig into now that we can say that we are done with Galvatron 1 forever. We can talk about Galvatron 2, I guess.
Okay, so per the TF Wiki, when Megatron was defeated, betrayed, and cast helplessly adrift in deep space, Unicron reshaped the remains into Galvatron. In one timeline, the Chaos Bringer succeeded in consuming Cybertron and granted his faithful herald freedom and the rule of Earth. But Galvatron has found, to his great chagrin, that his servitude would not end there. Unicron reached through time itself and plucked his creation away from his triumphant reward, forcing him to repeat his old mission. Rebellious and scheming, his mind slowly being eaten by madness, this Galvatron 2 is a rogue danger to all.
Right. Yes, that makes sense. Yeah, because I vaguely remember some of the very end of G1 where it was a whole new level of like unhinged Galvatron who was under control and under Unicron's control. So yeah, okay, technically Galvatron 2, sure.
But even then, that's like, damn man, like, way to make someone have like a mental breakdown.
Yeah. I mean, Galvatron has a pretty bad time, as it turns out, in all the Transformers continuities.
Okay, here we go. The Omni Productions dub versions of Galvatron revealing Grand Galvatron and Galvatron's death scene are downright hilarious. We might have to record a bonus thing, Andy, at some point, just looking at that specifically.
Yeah, I mean that is the reason why I've seen like Galvatron's death scene before, is from like the Twitter account that tweets clips of the Omni Productions dub, and that's one that comes up in regular rotation for being particularly goofy.
We might have to do a reaction clip to that or something at some point. Galvatron's revelation that he's been eyeing up Six Shot's head is interesting, to say the least. It's not revealed which other Decepticons he's hoping to turn into volunteer organ donors, which is perhaps something to be thankful for.
Yeah, I mean, I my assumption is just that like it would basically be everybody, like, because you've got to like, given the size of the planet and the requirements, it seems, and this is almost like one of the. I almost wish there was like an alternate timeline version of this series that followed, like, you know, maybe Scorponok gets offed and like Galvatron tries his plan, because I feel like there would be a point where he would announce like, yeah, you're all gonna become parts of me, and it's like every single Decepticon is just gonna be sort of sacrificed for Grand Galvatron, because that seems like the logical thing, that he would just basically, you know, genocide his own side just to like make the perfect version of himself, and that would actually be really interesting as a storyline, because it's then like, you know, would you end up with like Galvatron, like with the Decepticons join forces with the Autobots? Would there just be, you know, Decepticons versus Galvatron? It feels like there's a lot you could do with that storyline, but again, alas, we'll never see any of this.
We're gonna get a hot take now about Punch and Counterpunch. Punch is the worst spy ever. During his conversation with Galvatron, he acts incredibly nervous, asks random questions that make no sense in the current context, and basically gives Galvatron a massive hint that he's a spy. It's alright though, because Galvatron is apparently too stupid to notice this.
Yeah. I mean, it's not his best performance, for sure, throughout this episode.
When Six Shot knocks Twincast into the ravine, Steeljaw cries. Real watery tears, not in a comedic anime fashion either.
Yeah, I mean, we've had a few, because who else? Someone else cried in this series, I feel like. I mean, Daniel obviously cried a lot, and will be crying some more in the next episode. But
this is an appalling way to phrase it, but like, who else has died?
Yeah, I mean, who has?
I mean, Ultra Magnus. I remember Daniel cried in that. Did Metroplex shed some tears?
I know. I feel like it was either like did Ultra Magnus cry when something happened to Rodimus? I don't know. I feel like it was like an Ultra Magnus or Fortress or somebody, one of the big guys, like, because I don't know. I remember us having a discussion about whether Transformers can blush at some point, because there was like that was a thing. But
I mean, we've also had a discussion about if transformations are sexy, but that's a different debate.
I mean, yes, yes, that is a very different debate. But like, I feel like we've seen another character cry in this series, and I'm sure that was a thing. But anyway, yeah, that
yeah, because I'm just trying to think, because Optimus died in episode 3, then we've seen like numerous species perish, as it were. So maybe it was in relation to one of them.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, or maybe maybe Siljo cried when Blaster died the last time. I can't remember.
Actually, that might have been it. Now you mention it.
Who could,
when the whole Soundwave and Blaster battle happened in episode 4.
Like in the 15 seconds they were allowed to mourn before they had to go back to work. Like maybe they shed a tear.
They also add, later on though, there's another moment of humanization as we see Twincast has eyelids when they're shut because he's unconscious.
Oh, yeah, that is weird. I mean, that's definitely not been a thing before.
And then we come to foreign localization. So, we've got in Mandarin, it was the Emperor of Destruction vanishes on an iceberg. In Italian, Andy, it was the Emperor of Evil disappears in ice.
Yeah, I mean, it's a little bit more accurate in a way.
In the Shout Factory subtitles, the episode is called The Emperor of Destruction Vanishes on an Iceberg. They also note here that the cold open of Six-Shot rallying the Decepticons is removed, and repeated references to the Pit and the Inferno are made. We discussed that last time in relation to something, didn't we? I'm drawing a blank off the top of my head what that was.
Yeah, I don't recall either offhand.
Let me see if I can quickly find out. So, the Pit being a reference to things in other continuities and such as well.
Okay, right.
So, kind of trying to align other timelines and series and such. And then, the English Omni Productions dub for this episode, Andy, it was called The Final Demise of the King of Destruction. Which is a good episode title.
It is very, very good. Because this is the trouble. Just saying, like, vanishes on an iceberg just feels like he just, like, disappeared off with some penguins or something.
Or that he slipped and fell into water.
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, I can get behind that. Surprisingly for Omni Productions.
That said, I've now got this image of Galvatron having a good time with a penguin.
Yeah, it just
chilling out, literally chilling out.
Yeah, just be in the middle of a huddle where they all huddle together for warmth, and then just like get a big old cuddle for Galvatron.
Go for a swim.
Yeah.
On that note, folks, that is going to wrap up this particular podcast. Next time, we are going to be discussing episode 26 of Transformers Headmasters, which, it's another big one. It is the episode title, I Risk My Life for Earth. That is the episode we'll be talking about next time. Andy, before we wrap up this episode, any other thoughts you've got from this episode at all? Anything we didn't touch on? Anything at all?
No, I don't think so. I will say, like, Daniel didn't do anything stupid this episode, so, you know, that's a landmark occasion.
Was Daniel even appear in the episode?
All. Yeah, I'm not sure we ever really saw him at all.
Because we saw Spike because he was getting angry.
Yeah, no, he was getting annoyed. But no, I think this was like, I think there's maybe a little bit of Wheelie and no Daniel. So yeah, it's truly noteworthy occasion.
Yeah, don't worry though, folks. They're back in the next episode. I can assure you of that.
Yes, they are back.
So as mentioned at the top of the podcast, everyone, we'll be back in 2 weeks' time from the date this episode is publishing. We'll be talking about episode 26 of Transformers. If you enjoyed the episode, thank you very much for checking it out. Why not tell a friend? We'd really appreciate it. And if you feel so inclined, why not leave a little rating or hit us up in the comments on YouTube if you want and tell us what you thought of this as well. We'd really appreciate it. From myself, Jeremy Grace, from him, Mr. Andy Hanley, we'll see you in a few weeks' time as we discuss episode 26 of Transformers Headmasters. Until then, take care.
Bye, everyone.